Welcome to Shop Talk. Today we're going to be talking with two insiders and professionals who work and specialize in Marcom. We're going to learn what that is in just a second. And more particularly, diversity inside Marcom. So let's introduce who we're talking to today first. And we're going to look at Anne-Marie Sorrell. Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Drew. How are you?
Just fine, thank you. Anne-Marie is the president and CEO of the Mosaic Group, a full-service public relations, marketing, events management, and government relations firm. That's a lot, Anne-Marie.
It is.
What's your favorite part in all of that? Is it the public relating part, the marketing part, the event managing part, or I particularly am interested in the government relations part?
I would say the government relations part.
Ooh, good. We're going to talk about some of that coming up. And we also have Ceci Dadesman. Hi, Ceci.
Hey, Drew.
Yes, and for folks who have probably watched and read the blog regularly, you have seen Ceci's name because we've been doing conference sessions for like what, 40, 50 years now?
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah. Maybe even longer.
But just in case you're new to Ceci, Ceci is an arts marketer with more than 15 years experience in the field working with organizations of all sizes and disciplines. She's a frequent public speaker at industry events and also teaches arts marketing at West Virginia University.
Let's go Mountaineers.
Woohoo! Yay, sports team.
Drew, I noticed you paused because you knew I was going to do that. You gave me time to do that.
Wasn't even in the script. Just knew it was going to happen.
Yep.
Well, let's get into the fun stuff first. Marcom. Today we're talking about researching diverse audiences through the Marcom lens. First, what the hell is Marcom and why does it matter?
Go ahead, Anne-Marie.
It's simple. Marketing and communications.
Marketing and communications.
It's everything. It's everything we do in our business. It's everything we do in our lives, whether organizations feel it's necessary or not. It's the lifeblood of all that we do. If you don't have a efficient and effective Marcom department, your brand, your product, your services will suffer. Period. That's the easiest way to put it.
And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole too much with this because Ceci probably knows where I'm going with it. But inside at least the orchestra field, marketing and communications outside of smaller or mid-sized budget groups are usually two separate departments entirely. With the groups you work with, Anne-Marie, are they usually separate or same people?
It varies. In government, a lot of times it's separate because you have your public information officers and they're looking at just really telling what's happening. It was a police involved shooting or something happened with a government agency, and that's really what they're focused on, is that part of the communication strategy. And a lot of times they're dealing with crisis, right? And then marketing itself comes second tier, a lot of times forgotten, but I think more and more organizations, especially in the government sector, which is where I work a lot of, are waking up to the importance of marketing and then having those departments communicate together. On a private sector that I work in, usually they're pretty together and they have a person who's responsible for all of it, but then that person gets overwhelmed, which is when they hire a firm to come in and help with the execution and, additional strategy.
And for the folks watching this, how do the two of you know each other? How have you worked together before?
Ceci, you want to share? It was an interesting connection.
Well, Anne-Marie is in West Palm Beach, Florida, which is where I was for 11 years. And we just we met each other through a variety of like social and professional circles and things like that. And then when I was at Palm Beach Opera, we wanted to start an initiative to diversify our audience. And so Anne-Marie was the first person that I reached out to help us with that, because obviously I'm not in the communities that we were trying to reach. And she and her firm have that expertise. They do a lot with the multicultural marketing and communications. And so, we worked on a multi-year project to diversify the opera audience there.
The D word, diversity.
Yeah.
So in the arts world, I mean, it's not a secret to say, or, it's not a spoiler for anyone to say that diversity for a lot of folks really is just a word. How do we get past simply checking off the diversity box to getting into doing something meaningful?
Mm-hmm.
Was your work on that project something you would say a checkbox, or was it meaningful?
Oh, of course it was meaningful. Well, I mean, I think, Anne-Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, but we actually did make, meaningful strides, not only being, moving into those communities and working in those communities that we were trying to reach, but also bringing people who were not our normal audience demographic into the opera house, which is a lot of what which is what I'm the most interested in. Is a lot of companies, I think a lot of arts organizations, they feel that in order to communicate and engage with more diverse audiences, they have to be producing repertoire, or, like having an exhibition or a specific opera, or, doing, orchestral works by certain composers, that itself is what is going to attract those audiences, when really it's not that necessarily, right? It could be, I think, in some cases, but what we showed in Palm Beach is that, we were doing it at Palm Beach Opera, we were doing very traditional stuff, Verdi, Puccini, Mozart in very traditional productions, right? So not very.
Yeah, it was very.
So there was nothing different about the repertoire.
No.
It was about, how we were making those communities feel welcome.
Right? Yeah, that's interesting. Anne-Marie, really quick before you jump in on that, for context, had you worked with a nonprofit performing arts cultural group before this project?
Not in this depth, no. Okay. So we had worked with a venue, cultural performing arts, the venue, which was like the Kravis Center, on their various, season that was coming up. So we had done that. But when it came to really taking a deep dive in community engagement on multiple levels, this was the first arts organization that we had worked with, but we were able to take our experience from, what we had done with other nonprofits, other government agencies, and, other private organizations, and bring that experience, that expertise, and transform it into, the opera.
Was there any reticence? I'm just going to assume Ceci brought the project to you and said, here's some stuff and ideas that we have that we want to move forward to. Did you stop yourself at one point and say, oh my God, there's like the oldest, whitest institution on the face of God's earth wanting to try to diversify, and they're telling me it's going to be meaningful. What do I do with this?
Well, I think one of the first conversations we had, and what I love about working with Ceci is that we're able to be so candid and so open. And I remember when she called me and said, hey, we want to do a diversity initiative. We want to diversify our audience at the Palm Beach Opera. And she said, as you know, opera is pretty old, white, rich. And I said, yeah, that's pretty accurate. And so one of my...
You don't even need to check that research. It's good.
Right. But one of my first questions to Ceci, when we talked, she said, well, we just want to know how do we attract a different audience? And one of my first questions to Ceci was, well, did you ever ask anybody to come? Did you ever invite the audience? And it was such a simple question. And she was like, half the battle is being invited to the party, right?
Like one of the things that we found when we were actually going into those communities, remember we did like a whole bunch of like little networking things and little happy hours and like little events in the communities, some with artists, some without, most without actually, because we just
without
have time to be bringing artists all over the place. The thing that we heard over and over and over again is that people just didn't feel like anybody had invited them to come to the opera, or that anybody had made them feel welcome. to attend, which
Correct.
we were talking at the beginning, or maybe it was before we started, about making, so much of communication, so much of diversification and community engagement is about making a concerted effort. And that was a huge part of what we did. And that doesn't cost any money at all.
Yeah.
And let's cover a little bit of jargon that I think gets smoothed over in these discussions, because you use the phrase getting out into a community.
Mm-hmm.
Describe that. What does that entail?
So I think for Ceci and I, when we put our heads together, we knew that we wanted to go above and beyond traditional, let me place the ad on the radio, let me, do a digital social media ad campaign. We wanted to go beyond just those, digital or what he said, wavelength touch and reach of people. We wanted to actually say, how do we start building a relationship with the community? And the way to build a relationship with the community, we know we have to go where the community goes. We have to go where they are. And so we looked at where does the African American community go? Where do they eat? What do they listen to? What do they read? And where do they worship? Where do they hang out? What's important culturally to this particular community? And so when we started looking at who are the community partners, what organizations are they a part of and affiliated with? And so we took that approach to say we want to be very grassroots with our approach and making sure we're directly reaching to and talking with the audience directly. And that's the approach that we took. So when we say go where or go to the community, that's the approach we took.
And I think that it's important to note, because the topic of this episode is, Marcom, is that in arts organizations, there's normally like fundraising, marketing, PR, community engagement. They're all their separate little silos, but we can't forget that what all of those departments do is communicate with people. So everything that we did, and the way that we really made a difference and were able to make progress was by communication, right? At a very basic level. I think in arts organizations, we get so bogged down with those silos and saying, oh, well, if you want to go out into a community, that's the community engagement department's thing, right? That's not the marketing department's thing. It's all the same, because the people in those communities, when they're seeing a representative of your organization, or they're seeing, even if it is like a Facebook post or a print ad or whatever it might be, they're not saying, oh, well, this is from, the marketing department, or, oh, this is from community engagement. They're seeing it as being from the organization as a whole.
Absolutely.
Talk about the first event that you did, the actual in-person event.
Well, before we
know how you got there. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say before we talk about the event, I want to talk about the campaign and how we created, because the campaign was what created the event. And one of the things when we started thinking about, Ceci asked me like, well, what can we come up with to attract people? And I go back to what was kind of a simple question of, did you invite me? So we came up with a campaign because we said, well, what's going to resonate with people about opera, right? And so we came up with a campaign that was so simple: do something different, discover opera. So everything we built around that, the events, the community engagement, was about doing something different and discovering opera. Discover what are some of the Carmen? Discover. I'm running a blank right now, but you know what I mean. All different repertoires. So we came up with a simple campaign that we built everything around that campaign for this. So.
And I can hear the pens out there now just starting to write down furiously, do something different.
We're trademarking
it. I mean, it's so easy to just do that sort of thing. You can name it whatever you want, right? But it was about thinking, what for that for those groups of people, what would coming to the opera be? It would be trying something new. It would be doing something different. It would be something a little bit out of the ordinary. And, you know, how would we communicate with people to make them feel welcome and make them take that risk, right? Because there's always, if for a new person to attend something like an opera, right, in the before times when you would have to spend money on a ticket, drive to a theater, sit almost silently in a theater for 3 hours, right? Not necessarily knowing when to clap, whatever, not being allowed to cough, all of that stuff. That's a huge, you know, that's built on trust, right? That relationship. So making sure that we established a relationship with those communities where they knew that they could trust us.
Yeah. And I think too, with the events and the campaign, and we'll talk about the event to answer your question, Drew. And I think this is so important. I want to emphasize this for anyone listening. Do not come up with a campaign that panders. And that was something that we wanted to make sure when we came up with Do Something Different, Discover Opera, that it didn't identify a group per se. So, and what we found when we launched that campaign, as a result of our targeted market to the multicultural community, we were able to attract the LGBTQ community. We were able to attract a younger demographic overall. I mean, we were starting to get people that were just, no matter what their racial background was, they were under 40, under 50, coming to the opera. So we found that when we opened that campaign up and put it out there, we started attracting multiple niche groups and not just our target initially. So definitely creating a campaign that does not single out any particular group, but that is inclusive and not offensive.
And you're talking about inclusive, Anne-Marie, because in the beginning I mentioned, like what a lot of organizations think that they need to do repertoire and that's magically going to attract this audience, when it actually further alienates those audience, because it's like the only time you talk to the African-American community is when you do Porgy and Bess. Well, that community is like, well, where have you been the rest of the time? You're just talking to me when you're doing Porgy and Bess because now you want me, but the rest of the time you don't, kind of thing. And I know that there's other organizations that have found that as well, because I've heard that sort of, in a variety of places over the past few years. But it just goes to show that exactly what you just said, Anne-Marie, like not to pander, not to, you really want to make, the important thing is to communicate in a way that you create that relationship with
absolutely
the communities you're trying to reach.
Yeah. And our first event, Drew, sorry to cut you off, Drew was like, am I the host here or not?
This is the Anne-Marie and Ceci show right now.
Oh, I'm having a great time. Keep talking. Absolutely.
So our first event, as Ceci said at one point, that it was a kind of a pretty much a no-cost event. So what we did was we had a meet and greet. It was so simple. Meet the team of Palm Beach Opera and learn about the upcoming season. Learn about how you can, do something different and discover opera. It was so simple. And what we did was we partnered with a soul food restaurant, and we had a happy hour. So we did provide the refreshment for the guests, so it's free for them to attend. And then we had an evaluation because we wanted to actually get real data on, and it was simple. I think it was like 10 simple questions. Had they ever attended an opera? If so, how much would they be willing to pay for a ticket? Because we wanted to kind of see, was pricing an issue? And we found that pricing was not the issue at all. And so we did an evaluation. We had, some music playing in the background, some not opera, like some jazz or something. And we had some food, and people came and networked. The team, Ceci introduced herself and her team, and talked about the upcoming season. We gave out information and pamphlets about the upcoming season. I think we did a raffle for a couple of tickets that were coming up. And in an hour and a half max, we were done.
Mhm.
And it was a great turnout. And people walked away feeling like, oh my God, this is great. I didn't even know that there was an opera house. I didn't even know that this existed.
Yeah.
Were you able to actually track conversions from that first event to someone who actually attended a concert?
Well, I knew that was going to come up. With this kind of thing, it's really hard because you can't ask someone's race when they buy a ticket, right? You know, like you can't.
Right. But
And,
like names you weren't able to match in the database, or
we did some name matching of ticket buyers, and we did match a few, but each one of these events, you know, we didn't get absolutely everybody's name. And if somebody who filled out the survey, their partner or somebody else, they came with a friend who bought the tickets. So like, we didn't get too pedantic into that because we didn't wanted to, and with that particular case, because the audience was so white, the minute somebody walked in the lobby who was not white,
you knew,
immediately apparent.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I think too, for your question, Drew, because it was our first rollout of the campaign, and again, the objective was to build relationships, to begin the building of the relationship with the community. So, and we did this event about 3 months before the season actually started. So it wasn't when, tickets were hot and about to sell out or anything like that. So this was 3 months out. This was us really looking to build a relationship, cultivate the relationship, start the dialogue, get people comfortable with seeing and hearing from Palm Beach Opera before we start pitching them to purchase tickets. So it's really about building relationships. But when we did start the sales for main stage opera, we came up with other ways to track tickets, such as different codes for different groups that we partner with, etc.
But you know what? Speaking of that, because you mentioned, Anne Marie, about price, how price wasn't an issue. Remember, we did like discount codes as a way to try to track, but like no one used the codes because it wasn't about price.
Yeah.
Like, remember, we stopped doing the codes because it was like,
you're not using them.
yeah, no, I mean, we had a handful of people that used them, but it wasn't about the price. The price was not a barrier. I think arts organizations, we tend to go to the easy stuff to fix when we're looking at, oh yeah, this is not selling, or we want to reach this. So, because price, it's easy to discount something, or it's easy to price something lower, or to rescale your house or something like that. That's the easy stuff. Right. Creating relationships with a new community of people, this is the stuff that takes effort.
Well, yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That's going to segue into something that I want to hit here too. But before we do this, one thing I want to make sure we don't gloss over, because folks watching this may not have caught it. And I think it's an important point. You had this event, it was the meet and greet. You were there, you were talking, you were laughing, you were having a good time. I did not once hear anyone say, we went there to sell tickets.
Because we didn't.
You didn't, exactly. That's, I think, a key thing to keep in mind with any reasonable or successful relationship building campaign is, you're not asking to get married on the very first date. So let's actually build that relationship.
And that applies too, just to regular, even not to diverse audience, but to regular communications campaigns. If anytime anybody hears from you, you're asking them for money, whether it's a donation or a ticket or something, that's not going to go over well, right? They're eventually going to shut down and unsubscribe from your emails, or, not listen to what you have to say, because the only time you're saying is, broadcast. The whole relationship building concept, I think, spreads across all communications, no matter what the target audience is.
Mm-hmm. And also, for historical context, what year or what season was this taking place? I see the calculations.
I think we started in 2014, 15, 16, or was it 15, 16, 17?
One of the two.
Yeah, but it ran for 4 seasons because the
Okay.
first season was our pilot, and then the next 3 seasons we had a grant that we partnered on.
And that's another good point, because the first year that when we decided to do it, there wasn't like actual funding for it. Like I moved a little bit of money from a whole bunch of my marketing line items into this, program to pilot it. So, and we showed in that pilot year, right, Amory? Like we showed that it was effective. It was on a smaller scale, obviously, but we showed that there was promise there.
I think we had about a 14% increase the first year.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
Because we were able to show that when we did go for a grant, it was a lot easier to say, look, we've been doing this. This is what we found. This is our data. And so, we ended up getting the grant because we could show that it was viable.
Well, now that's even more interesting, because as you were giving me that answer, something just popped into my head. I pulled it up that I wrote about back in 2018. And Brent Sink, who was the former CEO of the San Francisco Symphony, gave an interview with an outlet back at that time when he was retiring and right before he left. And he gave what I thought was one of the most remarkably candid but honest answers to a question about the orchestra's connection with diverse communities, and in particular the African American community. And I've got the quote here. And he said, "We don't have the resources or the energy or whatever it takes to slot ourselves into a logical relationship with the African American community, a relationship built on the kind of cultural tradition we have in other communities. If you don't have that connection, the effort feels forced. It feels artificial, and then I think we're actually worse off than if we didn't do anything at all." Okay, let that soak in.
Real deep breath.
And Marie, what do you think about that? Because that's not I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your answer before you even talk, but that's not an unusual response to, identify the nonprofit cultural field.
Well, I think it's a response that unfortunately resonates across systems. Let me just put it that way. Not just in the nonprofit arena, but whether it's housing or whatever. So, so that's an unfortunate thought, because it's a missed opportunity to grow your audience. As people, humans first. Let's just be humans for a second. As humans, we're all curious. We all want various types of lived experiences. We all want to learn. We all want to grow from each other. That's just the human element in who we are. And I think if we as leaders of organizations and those who are influencers put the human that wants to experience culture, art, when you look at art, when you look at culture, it doesn't matter your background. If you can appreciate great art, whether it's performance or visual, you're going to want to be a part of that. You're going to want to connect to it. So to eliminate or alienate a particular community because you don't have a relationship with that community, you're missing an opportunity. You're missing an opportunity. I so appreciated when I worked with the opera, learning so much more about opera and attending the opera and getting more of my friends and family to attend who had never experienced it, because it just was not, it's an exposure thing. And as a community, when we limit exposure and access from other communities, we're doing damage to our society as a whole, period. And I don't know how else to express that. When children are not exposed to culture, to art, to opportunities, you're limiting them, who turn into limited adults, who turn into closed-minded adults, who turn into sheltered adults, and so on and so forth. So it's just a bad thought process. And I hope that this conversation and many other conversations will change that thought process and open up the attitude of inclusiveness, equity, and just us being able to coexist and learn from each other. I hope I said that okay.
Oh, it was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I want to follow up on that just a bit, because that kind of brings us full circle around to where we started with all of this, which is, how to get a program going, where do you get started? The San Francisco Symphony is arguably a group that's not hurting for money compared to other arts organizations. They've got some cash to spread around where they want to spread it. So let's say you're not the San Francisco Symphony. Or if let's actually say you are, and you have the kind of money, but if you sit back and say, well, it just doesn't feel like what we're doing feels forced, it feels artificial, and maybe it's better if we didn't do anything at all. How does an arts organization that, let's say, is going to be predominantly staffed by Caucasians, and they don't have a lot of connections with African American or any other communities at all, how do they get from where they are to where they want to probably be?
Well, I'll say before, because I know Anne-Marie has thoughts and I'll defer to her, but I think if an organization feels that it might feel forced or artificial, then that says a lot about the organization itself, that if it's how it's communicating feels forced or artificial, that probably means that it's not just forced or artificial to those communities, but that it's forced and artificial across the board, because all communications should be authentic, right? Because the authenticity is what people respond to, no matter what type of communication or what channel. But I can use myself as an example, and then I'll let Anne-Marie elaborate. At the time that I was at the opera, we were a team that was totally made up of Caucasian people. And the first thing that I did was, and not that my way is the right way, but the first thing that I did is I reached out to Anne-Marie and I just said, I don't know how to do this because I'm not in these communities that I'm trying to reach, but I know I have a firm belief that opera and the arts are for everyone. And if we say that the arts are for everyone, then we need to make sure that we are communicating that and being true to our word in a very authentic way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to what Ceci said, and she's absolutely right. When she approached me, she didn't come with a predisposed notion of, that I even knew how to do everything, or that, we were like, we're going to figure this out together. But I think to answer your question from my perspective, it's no longer acceptable to say that I cannot find who to connect with or groups to connect with in my community, or how to build relationships or how to get involved. It's no longer acceptable to not have, because let's start with your board of directors, arts organizations. Because maybe if you first diversified your boards, then your boards can point you in a direction of those in your community, because the people on your boards are involved in the communities that they represent, more than likely. So diversity and inclusion has to start at so many levels in the art organization. So if you have someone on your board who is, let's just say they're a Delta, they're part of a Greek organization. You have an African-American woman on your board who's a part of a Greek organization. The first thing that she's going to do is connect your organization to her organization, right? So you diversify your network of people first, and then you will find your natural fit, because if you have people within your network that love your cause, love your mission and what you do and what you stand for, they're going to automatically introduce you to the communities that you are trying to reach. So that's number one, and that's the warm sale of it. The other sale of it is, you got so many there's 105 urban leagues around the country. It's the oldest civil rights organization in the country, 100 plus years old organization. Reach out to your local urban league, your Boys and Girls Club. They serve all types of diverse children. So, you know, there's just no excuse anymore. It's no longer acceptable to say that I cannot find, and then you can do what, you know, anyone else would do. I get calls from random people all the time. Hey, I see you're a multicultural firm. Research a multicultural marketing and PR firm to help you out, or someone who has the expertise in diversity and inclusion. Research them, seek them out, and have them help you and consult with you on your initiatives and efforts. So there are so many ways that you can get this done, but it's definitely no longer an excuse to say that you can't reach, and I'll just be candid, you can't reach Black folks or Hispanic folks. We out here.
So staying inside the bubble, you're saying no.
No.
And actually, that like brings up too, because what Anne Marie was saying about the Greek organizations, and like I had no idea about how Greek organizations like that worked. I wouldn't have known that unless Anne Marie shared that with me. So like sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time you have to be willing to take chances and to look outside your normal way of doing things, your normal channels. And as arts organizations, we love to do the same thing the way we've always done it. That's our favorite thing. But with this and with everything else, but since we're talking about this particular subject, you have to be willing to go outside of that, because the right communications channel to reach a particular audience may be one that you're not currently using or even aware of.
Yeah.
It might change.
And I'll say for my communications and marketing folks out there, we're in marketing communications. This is the opportunity for us to be the creatives that we are. And what I loved about working with Ceci, she didn't tell me no to like any of my ideas. You know, I was like, okay, Ceci, you know, for example, I said, well, people may want to know, because as we were getting closer to the season, I said, well, people may want to know what to wear to opera. And so we created a fashion show by African-American designers, fashion designers, and we had couture designers, we had jewelry designers, we had a stylist who hosted and emceed, and we partnered with the Spady Museum, which is an African-American museum here locally, and we had this what to wear, you know, opera, I can't remember what we all called it, but whatever it was, but it was what to wear to opera, and an amazing fashion show.
It was so cool. It was so
cool.
That is the perfect moment right there. I'm actually going to stop. We're going to stop this episode. We're going to take just a little bit of an extra thing at the end that, you know, people watching this, you're just going to have to come back and know when this happens and actually tune in. We're going to follow up on that, on especially that one point. So hang tight on that. Before we get to it, though, I want to obviously thank you two, but I should also realize I might have been a little bit tough because I jumped into that comment from Brent the Sink kind of like out of the blue. And it looked a little bit like beating up on someone. I give the man a substantial amount of credit for having the courage to say that candidly, frankly, and getting the conversation going. Sadly, I haven't seen anyone else pick it up in the field, especially at that executive level, who are willing to have that kind of candid engagement. So I think the more we talk about this, and especially connected with efforts like you and getting feedback from folks who are actually in the trenches doing the work, this is good. So now, to kind of wrap up officially, I want to thank both of my guests here for this episode, Ceci Dadisman and Anne Marie Sorrell. Be sure to check out all the fun link stuff below. They'll have links to both Anne Marie's firm and Ceci's stuff, and you'll learn more about who they are and the amazing stuff they do. And you are absolutely going to want to tune back in for the little bit of after show that we're going to get into here. And, you know, if you want to stop and get yourself a drink, go ahead and do that and then come back. So we'll talk to you soon, and thanks, guys.
Thank you.